I would say that every time you are identified with a very compelling visual story, it's the complete opposite from how you perceive a typical ad. When you see a typical ad, you feel like you've been sold to. So your goals are really high. Try to target a single emotion in your story that it's really critical and aligned with your brand, and build a story around that. That's number one. Two, there's a great evidence for in terms of how you create a compelling characters that are believable, relatable. When you create your brand narrative, it's important to grab that moment, that initial incident that took you on a journey. We call it also, the call for adventure.
And that is coming up next on Bootstrapping Your Dreams Show, so stay tuned. So, the big question is this: how are ambitious people like us, who don't have a lot of resources, did not go to Ivy League colleges, were not born into wealth, how do we become resourceful enough, use our creativity, our dedication, and a little bit of crazy to bootstrap our way to realizing our dreams? Whether it is launching a new company, launching a new app, or making it to the top of the corporate ladder. That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. We have created a tremendous community of bootstrappers, entrepreneurs, and professionals who are ambitious, resourceful, and want to get things done. We brainstorm, support, and help each other out. So come join us. Navigate to bootstrapping.group, join today, and get the Startup Founders Technology Accelerator video series absolutely free. If you enjoy this video, then do let us know by hitting that like button now. Or if you want us to improve our content, then go ahead and hit that thumbs down button and give us your honest feedback in the comment section below. Here at Tetranoodle, we are passionate about entrepreneurship, technology, and innovation. Every week, we bring you insightful and engaging videos, interviews, tips, tricks, and strategies to help you grow your business or rise in your corporate profession. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing, and do not forget to hit that bell icon so that you are notified when we publish new content. Hello and welcome to this new episode of Bootstrapping Your Dreams Show. I'm your host Manuj Aggarwal, and today we'll be talking with Shlomi Ron. After 20 years of well-rounded digital marketing experience, having worked both on the agency and brand sides of Fortune 100 and 500 brands such as American Express, Nokia, and IBM, Shlomi co-founded the Visual Storytelling Institute to address the rise of information overload and decreasing attention spans, resulting in businesses' challenges to rise above the noise. At VSI, Shlomi helps business leaders rise above the communication noise through visual storytelling production, corporate and academic training programs, and thought leadership programs so that they can connect better with their audience, empower their lives, and grow their companies faster. Thought leader and speaker at key marketing conferences such as BMA, Social Media Week, and Integrated Marketing Week, to name a few. He is the host of Visual Storytelling Today podcast and also an avid blogger on the VSI blog that has placed VSI at the #1 position on Google for key visual storytelling terms. He served as chair of programming at the South Florida Interactive Marketing Association, board member at the Miami STEM Advisory Board. He created the education curriculum for the Visual Storytelling Experience full semester course based on his visual story framework at the Idea Center at Miami-Dade College, where he taught for the past 3 years. And he also runs the estate of the artist Bookie Schwartz, one of the early pioneers of video art. Wow, you have accomplished so much, Shlomi. I'm so excited to talk to you and learn a lot from you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Manju. This is a great honor to be here, and I'm excited to share.
So tell us about your journey. How did you get involved in marketing, and how did it evolve over the years into visual storytelling?
Absolutely. So when I started my career, I pretty much knew that I want to stay in the communication space. And so I started my first job was really in a Ogilvy and Mather agency in New York. They just started the interactive department. I was working, surprisingly enough, on the IBM account back then.
I see.
And later, I actually was part of IBM as a regular employee. And for the most part, during these 20 years, I stayed pretty much in digital marketing, primarily on the client side, working, as you mentioned earlier, working for IBM, heading social and mobile for their hardware business unit. Spent some time at American Express, doing some digital personalization. And then I spent some years at Nokia before they got acquired by Microsoft, a variety of marketing roles. And pretty much 3 years ago, when I relocated from New York to Miami, I had another job at Cable and Wireless. It's a telecom company that covering the Caribbean market. Right after that, I felt like I paid my dues to the corporate America and decided that I want to kind of leverage my experience and also my side passions that revolved around visual media. And that's how I started the Visual Storytelling Institute.
I see. So storytelling is, becoming really popular term, and people are sort of gravitating towards that, trying to understand it, crack it. But visual storytelling is something new that I've come across. So can you unpack that for us? What do you mean by visual storytelling?
Sure. So why it's so important is that because if you look at the past 5 to 10 years, you see basically a decline in the effectiveness of paid media. You see, basically most of the income is centered around Facebook and Google, and programmatic is getting into the space very heavily. But the reality is that audiences really don't respond as much effectively to paid media as they used to. So marketers started to think, how can I break through this communication noise and get to audiences? So what they did, they pretty much looked at next door at Hollywood, how they made movies and how they engage audiences for generations now, and took some signals from the entertainment world. And that's where, the philosophy of how to create a compelling visual story, be it like an explainer video, infographics, or whatever visual media format you choose, and apply it to marketing and business context. And when I started, if you would Google visual storytelling, you most likely would find entries about photography, filmmaking, graphic design. There was nothing about visual storytelling in the context of marketing. And that's exactly the area that we occupy at VSI, basically bringing the gospel of visual storytelling from the entertainment origin into marketing. And you might ask, so what is visual storytelling? So the definition that I came up with is any marketing strategy where you have 3 conditions. One is that you use the 3-act story structure, which is basically that timeless formula of using setting, conflict, resolution in your message. 2, that you place your customer as the hero of the story, so it's not about the brand like it used to be. And 3, that use a visual media format, and that could be from images, video, infographics, all the way up to AR and VR.
I see. And so what are the differences between a traditional storytelling and how is it more effective? You brought up the point, like we have so much noise and the paid media is not very effective, but at a psychological level, a person who's actually watching this visual stimulus, what are the effects that are different from a traditional storytelling?
Yeah, absolutely. So I first going to start from the scientific evidence. And we know that based on the work of Professor Hasson from Princeton, and there's the work of what's his name, Professor Zach, that discovered the oxytocin, which is a chemical that the brain creates every time that we are identify ourselves with a story. It's basically, he likes to call it the empathy chemical the brain releases. The other important aspect is that the work of Dr. Hasson is really the first one to discover the phenomenon of neural coupling. And that means whenever you hear a story that you identify with, you basically feels like it's your story because you look for elements in your past experiences that reflect in that story. So that's called neural coupling. The other element that he found is neural mirroring. So not only, you can identify with the story, your brain activity is actually mirroring the same brain activity of the storyteller. And at some points, you even anticipate where the story is going to go and completely mirror that brain activity. So that's really on the scientific evidence. But from a marketing speech, I would say that every time you are identified with a very compelling visual story, it's the complete opposite from how you perceive a typical ad. When you see a typical ad, you feel like you've been sold to. So your goals are really high. When you exposed to a very compelling visual story, it feels like entertainment, like a movie. And you feel like you are here to entertain. Nobody's selling me anything, so your guards are coming down. And you have much more opportunity to identify with the message and build trust. And once you build trust, there is more chances that you're going to change behavior afterwards.
Got it. And you have bachelor's degrees in sociology and anthropology. Did these degrees and your education play a role in discovering this visual storytelling aspect of marketing?
Yeah, I think part of this has to do, when you think about social media, it's a very social environment. And, when you look at sociology, anthropology, this is really how the science of understanding human behavior in groups and, dig into the fine details of human behavior. So today, it's actually interviewed an ethnographer in one of my podcast episodes, and that was a fascinating work because what she's doing, we always preach as marketer entrepreneurs, that before you go to market, you need to research your customer, get to the fine details about who they are, what they say. So there's a whole, field of ethnography that basically it's an offshoot of sociology and anthropology that basically embed researchers where your customer lives and follow them where they go. And the bigger idea here is really that they want to get not only to what your customer say and do, which is the explicit level, but more interestingly, what they think and feel. And sometimes the think and feel is in conflict with the do and say.
Yeah.
So it's important to find these fine details. So the more you find these information gems by researching interpersonally your audience, there's better chance you're going to get this intelligence into your story. And once you get this into your story, the moment your customer exposed to these stories, they say, hey, this is my story telling me here, because you're just mirroring things that they already relate to from their past experiences and what they already think. And at that moment, the brand story that you just created stops becoming a brand story. It becomes your customer story. And that's where the magic happens.
Awesome. Well, that's fascinating. Now, you obviously, you are an expert storyteller. So tell us what makes for a compelling story. What is something that people gravitate towards? What are some of the components that you must consider to create a compelling story?
Generally speaking, I would say that the first thing that your customer is processing is emotions. So your brain is trained to first get the emotions, and only the second level is the rational level, so basically to see if it makes sense logically. And sometimes you are super excited about the story, and then you try to rationalize it after the fact. So I would say definitely the number one recommendation is really try to target a single emotion in your story that it's really critical and aligned with your brand, and build a story around that. That's number one. Two, there's a great evidence for in terms of how you create a compelling characters that are believable, relatable. And these are all elements that I mentioned earlier. These are all coming from your earlier research. The more intelligence from your research you have that you bake into your story, more chances it's going to resonate stronger.
I see. I see. And you must have seen a number of these compelling stories in your career so far. Can you share a couple of them, which are your favorites?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, but one that came to mind is a few years ago, IKEA actually created the book campaign, and the concept was really compelling. Based on the research, they found that their target audience is very digitally oriented folks. There was just launches of a variety of Apple products at the time, and it created like a sense of digital culture. So what IKEA thought, how can you really promote a print catalog, which is updated technology? So what they did, they pretty much compared this print book into as if it was an iPad, and they talked about that book using the terminology of an iPad. And like benefits compared to an iPad. The battery lasts forever. Nobody can take it from you. All kinds of comparison, which is really were funny, and that created amazing viral effect.
I see. So this is an interesting point about creating viral effect. So is that virality somehow linked with the emotional connection that people feel?
Yeah, and some studies actually found that the most viral videos has to do with the pairing of feelings of surprise and awe, for example. So something that really surprises you and gives you a sense of awe tends to really work well. Sometimes, to lesser extent, you see some examples of videos that might create fear or anger, negative feelings that create also a sense of traction. But this is what I saw. I mean, the other stuff that is the obvious, again, it's about how can you create a content that's relatable to your audience? Because again, the moment they can see themselves and relate to your message, you got them.
I see. And now let's talk about revenue and sales, because creating stories, obviously it's a core part of the marketing. It spreads awareness. But how do you take that awareness and translate it into real revenue, real sales? Because at the end of the day, you need to tell the story and prompt the user to purchase your product or service. So how do you incorporate that into the stories in such a way that it doesn't come across as too salesy?
Yeah, I mean, the logic of analytics for stories is pretty much the same as, any other digital message. There's, the top of the funnel, awareness metrics, how many views, exposures got to story. And then if it's a video on YouTube that you release, you can always, track how many people, the time they actually saw the video and to what extent. And obviously the holy grail is how many people actually clicked on the link that points to your website where you actually want them to do something. And once you have a landing page that is fully trackable with the conversions, you can actually track the whole buyer's journey this way.
I see. And so you talked about incorporating your branding. Creating the stories which align with your brand. So which one comes first? Your organizational identity and brand, and then the stories, or first your backstory and then the brand? What is more important?
So yeah, let me make a little bit an order in what you just said. So the way to think about it is and again, I'm talking now to your audience, which is comprised mostly of entrepreneurs. So think about yourself as an entrepreneur, and every entrepreneur, before they got started, there is the day where everything was normal, routine, but then something happened. It could be negative, positive. We call it in visual storytelling, the initial incident. Something happened that changed the status quo. and caused you to go on a journey, start your business. So when you create your brand narrative, it's important to grab that moment, that initial incident that took you on a journey. We call it also, the call for adventure. And when you build your brand narrative, it's important to bake it into your narrative, because people like to understand where you're coming from. And also it creates a sense of purpose with your employees, customers, partners, vendors, anybody who touches your business. So the purpose of the brand narrative that comes first is to give the DNA for your entire business, and it's going to cascade down to any business story that you're going to create afterwards. So your business stories are basically at the proof points of your overall brand narrative. Good example, a metaphorical example that another storytelling expert, Michael Margolis, uses, is that if you can imagine a narrative is basically like a necklace, but every bead on that necklace is a story.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. So will you say a narrative is more like a collection of stories which tell sort of end-to-end story, like, the overall story about you and your brand?
Story. It's not a collection of story. It's more kind of the DNA of your brand. It basically gives a purpose, why you started your business, why you do it, and where you headed. So it just gives the overall purpose for your stories. So once you create a business story, a good example is like the American dream. What is the American dream? That's a brand narrative, right? But the success story, it's a proof point of that brand narrative. What is Apple's brand narrative? It's the thing different, the trailblazer phenomenon, and the campaigns they use provide proof points to that.
I see. That's great. So now let's go a little bit deeper into that. Maybe you can share with us your backstory, your story. What was the epiphany that you had when you started to think, okay, I want to go in this adventure and start a digital marketing agency?
Yeah. So when I started in marketing, as I said, the majority of my career was in digital marketing, but all along I was nursing my side passions, was just hobbies. I took Italian language classes and for over 10 years, basically. And I have no ancestry in Italy. It's just pure passion. And as I was moving up the levels, we stopped using textbook and start watching movies and use them as a way to discuss the movie in Italian. So after that, I started a blog about classic Italian cinema. I ran some Q&A discussions in mini festivals. So that was one part. So on the blog, I was basically writing film reviews as a spectator, what I thought about the film and about the style, and just as a hobby. So that was one part. The other part was, as you mentioned too, that my father-in-law was one of the early pioneers of video art, Bookish Schwartz. And his work is collected both in a major museum like Guggenheim, Whitney, and others. So today, since he passed in 2009, I help manage the estates, and that means working with the museum and finding ways to spread the word about his video art legacy. This is another area completely different from marketing, completely different from movie making that I got involved into. So, and my last position, I also worked at a company called Serious Decision. It's a research and advisory firm recently acquired by Forrester. I was heading digital marketing there, and part of my role was managing the digital strategy at the annual summit. So one year we decided to mount this giant interactive social media wall. It's comprised of 90 digital displays. Unbelievable. And I basically designed the whole interface, and it was, to me, was a revelation to see how the attendees flocked to that giant display and basically interacted with it, through their devices. and were able to create content and see it up on screen. And the magic of basically creating stories on the fly and see it, shared in a physical space was quite powerful for me. And that's what got me initially. I started another company called Overlooks.tv that initially I thought was going to be focusing on interactive social media walls, but it didn't work that well, and I switched gears. And even though I used the terminology of visual storytelling for Overlooks.tv, but I felt like the space for visual storytelling is much bigger than just social media walls.
Yeah.
And that's where I started to listen to some storytelling podcasts and kind of connecting the dots that there's a whole world of marketing that basically hungry for refreshing their strategies and going beyond just the passive ad consumption, and bringing something that's going to cut through that communication noise I was talking about.
Yeah.
And that's how I formed DSI.
That's great. It seemed like a lot of things sort of came together for you to lead you to this passion of yours. And I think a lot of people actually, one of the things that I find that, a lot of these stimulus come to us, and we generally don't listen to these voices and don't take action on what our life is telling us. What is your experience in that regards? Like, making a shift from career professional to entrepreneur. I mean, you had to have a lot of self-confidence, but also a lot of self-awareness in terms of what is that actually you want to do. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you correctly touched on the fact that you definitely need to be sensitive to your passions. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you'll be surprised. You'll have clues to that from your early childhood. You are attracted, naturally to early on. Most likely, there's a chance that you're going to gravitate in your business years. So it's something that is important to pay attention to your hobbies. Also pay attention to what your friends, colleagues come to you for questions, for help, for advice. This is another, area that could give you some clue to how you're perceived by your environment, about what you're good at. So, because the most important thing, for us entrepreneurs is that the things that you want to focus on, you need to be absolutely 100% passionate about, because, that's your fuel pretty much. And, yeah.
Okay, awesome. And now let's talk about your podcast. So can you tell us when did you start it? What is the content of the podcast, and how's it going?
Yeah, so the podcast is the Visual Storytelling Today podcast, and it's an extension of VSI. It's nicely positioned in what I call the thought leadership bucket, where my objective is really to educate the marketplace, new generation of marketers and communicators, entrepreneurs, how to use visual storytelling effectively. And the format is very simple. It's interviewing visual storytelling experts from the discipline. And the way I define the discipline is really following our three core areas coming from our framework. There are folks coming from the story making category, which is basically how you build your brand narrative that goes into research, ethnography, like I mentioned. And then there is the story visualizing, which represent basically the production side of the house. These are filmmakers, could be photographers, anybody that's really responsible for creating a visual story. And then the last area is really, I call it storytelling. In our context, storytelling is really the marketing arm. How you can, once you have visual story created, how can you communicate it across channels and stages of the buyer's journey?
I see. And what role does this podcast play in your overall business strategy?
It's a great role because, as you know, podcast, in addition to give you a authority in the space that you're trying to control, is also a great business development technique, where you can invite people you want to partner with or collaborate with, and it's a great alignment that you talk to other key influencer in your space. And that's a very effective technique to get to that as well.
Awesome, that's great. And when you look at some of the podcasts that are out there, can you share what you notice, like what kind of content is being put out there? Is it in line with the sort of captivating storytelling methods that you incorporate into your marketing or your narrative? And what are the things that you notice that podcasters should be doing but they are not doing as well?
Yeah, I mean, as a general rule, I would advise anybody, try to enter the market of podcast is first just do your research, see what other podcasts are done in your specific niche. What is the format? Is it an interview? Is it one person talking? What is the format? Is it a video only? Is it an audio? Is it video, audio, and text like I do like in transmedia experience using a blog post as well. So figure out what people are doing and then go back to your team and brainstorm about how you're going to provide a fresh angle. But from what I'm seeing, the best it really depends on the space, but generally speaking, I would say, the great podcasts are those who, specifically the business podcasts, are those that they can give you really tangible lessons, what I call actionable tips that you can actually go back and apply and test with your business. These are the most successful ones.
Awesome. That's great. And the theme of our podcast is all about bootstrapping. So when you started your business, did you bootstrap it? Did you get funding from external sources? How did that work?
I'm the happy bootstrapper. And basically something that, I started from scratch. And, originally even our business model was different. It was, my original thought is to model VSI as if it was a trade association with monthly offline events and membership and all that. And later we kind of changed focus and kind of reposition ourselves more as not even as agency, but more as a think tank. That's why the thought leadership is really important, because visual storytelling is quite new discipline in the context of marketing. So there's got to be a lot of education of the marketplace. So that's how I define myself, differentiate myself from a typical marketing firm from that.
Awesome. And can you share any benefits that you see in bootstrapping rather than raising money? Like, was it? I'm sure it was like a uphill journey. But
Yep.
do you see that bootstrapping overall has been beneficial than raising money?
Yeah, it really depends on your goal and also your lifestyle. Sometimes, early on in your career, you might be more inclined to go funding maybe, but then you get temptation from your investor, do this, do the other. Later in life, after 20 years working for a corporation, I was really more interested in freedom and kind of shaping my own future the way I want. And I felt like building the business gradually without any, external dictation of do that or the other is better suited to me. But it's really up to each person to decide what makes sense to them.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your knowledge about visual storytelling and marketing. This has been a very fascinating conversation, something new, fresh topic. So thanks a lot for sharing that. Now, before I let you go, can you tell us how people can reach out to you?
Yeah, you can definitely go check our website, visualstorytell.com, and you can reach out to me at SHLOMI at visualstorytell.com, Shlomi at visualstorytell.com. And I would also like to say that later this month, I'm going to be publishing my first book,
Awesome.
And it's going to be a collection of short stories with visual storytelling principles. So stay tuned to that as well.
Awesome. That's great. Well, thank you so much for being with us again.
Thank you so much, Manuj.
Thank you. And that's all for now. Until next time. Now, if you're an entrepreneur or a career professional, then I invite you to join our growing community. Navigate to bootstrapping.group. As a welcome bonus, you will get the Startup Founders Technology Accelerator video series and Mastering Your Inner Game video series absolutely free. This series of short videos address some core issues which are instrumental in helping you move forward in your business or career. The videos are yours to view and share for free. No obligations or strings attached, except for one. You have to take action and implement it. So join us today. Navigate to bootstrapping.group. If you want more engaging videos and insightful interviews with industry's thought leaders, then check out the other videos we have picked for you. The link is right there. And if you want to be notified about our new content, please do consider subscribing to our channel.